Hey guys, myself Sampath Kumar. In this video, we are going to start a DT Marathon Part 1. I'll be taking you through first two chapters like Introduction, Residential Status and Scope of Total Income. Very quickly we'll be going, and I request you to have the study material or whatever the material that you follow in front of you so that you don't miss on anything. So let's start. So this is the way I used to start, and this is the way that I adopt. Our agenda will be to look into these 9 sections. Short title, extent and commencement. Short title, we call this act as the Income Tax Act 1961. Extent, it applies to all of India including Jammu and Kashmir. Commencement, it starts from first day of April 1962. Remember, it is 1962 but not 1961. Don't make that mistake if it comes in the bits. Definitions, there are a lot of definitions that we have in the Income Tax Act, but we don't have to read all those definitions, and which are not relevant for examination also. What are relevant is I'll be writing here. Section 2(1)(a) agricultural income, that is something that we need to look into, and also the what you call, when you call an agricultural land as a situated in a specified area and non-specified area. So for that particular purpose, for capital gain chapter also, we will be requiring this chapter, this section. Section 2(11) block of assets. This is also required for PGBP. So when we do that WDV rights as per section 43(6), we need to group the assets into a different block category. So that category we are calling it as a block of assets. When do you block, when you categorize into single block is when, if it is a tangible, it has to be building, land or machinery. If it is intangible, like know-how, patent, copyright, trademark, something like that. The more important thing is that it has to have a single rate and it has to have a similar nature. Take an example, I have cars. So I cannot say all cars are with the same rate. I have to segregate which cars I am using for personal use, which car I am using for transportation purpose. In the machinery also, like, you need to segregate, like, are you having the same rate and are the nature same? Like, one machinery is having 15% depreciation, one land is having 15% depreciation. Example, you cannot group these two. So in order to group assets, it needs to have a same rate and same nature. And 2(14) capital asset. When we do this capital gain chapter, we will be coming back to this chapter anyway. You need to understand the definition of the capital asset, then only you will understand when you have to pay the capital gain tax. And section 2(15) charitable activities, which is less important, but still I would say you better be good with the section. And 2(31) person. The definition of person includes, okay, like it will have certain things which is more important as per my understanding. Reason, I'll take now only. Section 2(31) person includes individual, HUF, firm, which includes LLP as well, AOP, BOI, whether registered or not, company, local authority, artificial judicial person not falling under any of the above heads. So why I am stressing so much on this one particular definition is, it's not that they will be asking question on this definition, but when you are doing this basic exemption limit, you need to know for every person mentioned under the person's definition, what is his basic exemption limit, what is his basic exemption limit. The same way, your surcharge also, there are so much of amendment in the recent past. You need to understand what rate is applicable for separate people. And residential status. So these 3 things are tied up to the definition of person. Like, when you know the person, you will have a thinking that, okay, I know the residential status of a person, individual. Do I also know for HUF? Do I also know for firm? Do I also know for AOI, AOP, BOI, something like that? Okay, so that is the reason why the definition of the person is very important. And section 242(a), and this is like your short-term capital asset. This is important reason. Like in order to say which rate is applicable, you need to have the, what do you mean by this short-term capital asset? What is the period of holding for which you call something as a short-term or long-term? Okay, and again the rates will differ. So this section is something that I'll be stressing so much. And section 242C is your slum sale, which used to be a final level question. Now they got it down to intermediate. So there is a possibility that there can be a question on this slum sale. What do you mean by the slum sale? Like I have divisions, like I have a division in Hyderabad, and I have a division in Vijayawada, I have a division in Bangalore or Chennai. So what I'm trying to do is I want to sell off one of the divisions, like Chennai division, I want to sell it off. So what I say is I'm selling this division for 10 crores. Rather than saying my land value is this much, my plant value is this much, my debtors is this much, my stock is this much. Instead of giving values to each and every asset and liability in my balance sheet, I'm simply putting a price on the division saying that it is for 10 crores. So in that situation, if we say it is a slum sale. So this is a numerical problem. There will be a numerical problem on this question. So these are some of the definitions which I stress more. Anyway, we will be solving in the present video only. And we'll understand what you mean by this previous year. Our previous year is 2019 to 2020. Our assessment year is 2020 to 21. You might be aware that if your income is earned in a previous year, that will be taxed in the succeeding assessment year. Like if you are earning an income in 1920, that has to be assessed in 20 to 21. But there are certain exceptions. This is not always the case. This is a general rule that income earned in a previous year is assessed to tax in the subsequent assessment year. The exceptions are that whenever the assessing officer feels that there is a possibility that income is there is a leakage of revenue and there is a possibility that the assessee might escape the tax, then they'll invoke some provisions and say that no, I can't wait for the previous year to end. I can't wait for the assessment year to start. I want you to pay the tax right now. So those are the 5 situations. 172, 174, 174A, 175 and 176. So these are the 5 situations. There could be a question on this probably for 5 marks. So I'll take you there. See, preferably there are certain definitions, there are certain sections which I always suggest you to memorize. Not all. This is something that could be an examination question. So when you know that something is an examination question, better that you revise it multiple times and get used to the sections. Section 172, shipping business of a non-resident. This is like a non-resident shipping company is coming and they are taking some livestock. They are taking some passengers or some goods. So they will be charging some fees, right? So when they are earning income in Indian territorial water, which means that it is accrued in India. We'll come to that section also. Like it is accrued in India. So we need to get the tax. We need to get our own portion, right? But thing is that the ship is belonged or it is chartered by a non-resident. There is a possibility that he will come today and he might not come for the next assessment year. We don't know, right? Somebody is from other countries just coming here. If he has a specific agency in India, if he has some establishment, some branch or some authorized person in India, we can say yes. Even if you let the ship to leave also, there is a person who will take care of the tax portion and he will pay the tax. But if he is not having any of those, as I said, like agency or the commission agent or the representative office in India, so what will say what the assessing officer will say is that first you pay the tax, then you leave. Okay, so the foreign going ship of a non-resident person will not be entitled to leave unless he pays tax. Okay, persons leaving India. So this is like I'm getting an opportunity from US. Like somebody is hiring me there, so I'm going there, right? So if I'm going there, there's no issue. But I'm going in November, like April, May, June, July, August, September. All these months I have earned some salaries. I have earned some revenue, right? Some income. So I need to pay tax for this 6 months or 7 months. I cannot say that no, this is only a previous year. Let the assessment year start. Then I'll come back and pay. Who will listen to me? Nobody will listen. There is a high possibility that I will go there and I'll settle down there only. So government will be losing the revenue. So whenever assessing officers feels that somebody is leaving India just after the assessment year or maybe during the just after the previous year, or just it's finishing. So assessing officer will ask him to pay the tax and then leave India. 174A, assessment of AOP, BOI, AJP formed for a particular purpose or event. So this is also I need to explain. This AOP, BOI, we need to understand what you mean by that. As I just said in an example, in a section 231, we have a definition of person, right? So the person can be an individual, it can be an HUF, it can be a company, it can be a firm, right? So association of persons, you understand this word persons. So person can be anything, right? Like me, an individual, I'm joining hands with ABC firm, and I'm also joining hands with a company. So all three people are coming together and starting one short business. Like the IPL is going on, or some event is going on, only for that particular event, that some movie launch is going on. For that particular purpose, I want to just provide some services for which I cannot do it on all alone. I want to take the services of a firm or help of a firm, at the same time help of a company. So all these three people are coming together. So we will be called as association of persons. You understand this word persons. So person can be individual, HUF, company, firm, or anything else also. When it comes to body of individuals, only individuals has to be there, like Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Ram, Mr. Sham, whatever. Only individual has to be there. Then we are calling it as body of individuals. Otherwise we call it as association of persons. Why this point is coming? When an association of person or body of individual is formed for a short period of time, there is a possibility that they get dissolved in the previous year only, or maybe immediately completion of the previous year. So what the assessing officer will say is that, yes, you have done the business, you earn the profit, I cannot wait for the previous year to end, you pay the tax now and then you get dissolved. Okay, so this is also one of the exceptions. Persons likely to transfer property to avoid tax. So there are certain people, like in newspaper also we get to know about these things, like there is a income tax rate on a particular person. Somebody is caught with a cash or a gold or smuggling or something like that. So when they are caught like this, and income tax say that I cannot wait for the previous year and assess me the concept now. I know you are a fraud person. There is a possibility that you will taint your money, you will convert your black money to white money. So, or maybe you will prepare some documentation, or you will transfer to somebody else. You do anything to avoid the tax. I know that. You pay the tax in the current year only, right? The same logic for the discontinued business also. Like if a business is discontinued in the previous year, the government will not wait for the previous year to end and then to new year to start. They'll say that yes, you are selling off your assets, you are selling off your liabilities. In the same way, you settle our liabilities also. And this is not always the case. Whenever assessing officer has an opinion that there is a revenue leakage, then only he will invoke these provisions. Otherwise, he will not simply go to every organization which is discontinued. Okay. So that is for section 3. Coming to charge of income tax, as we know that we have 5 heads, right? Like salary head, income from house property, PGBP, capital gain, income from other sources. Every section will have every head will have its charging section. Section 15 will be charging section for salary. So in order for you to pay tax, they will say like who should all pay tax under salary, who should all pay tax under income from house property, what is its charging section. So that section will give power for the whole head, right? The same way, the charging section for the whole act is like they'll say we need to pay taxes under 5 heads, we need to club the income, we need to set it off carry forward, and we need to use all TDS, TCS provisions also. So that is a overall picture of section 4. It's a bit marker question. Normally we cannot expect in other question. Scope of total income and residential status, these two are two important topics. I can expect some 10 to 15 marks between these two sections. Section 5 will say scope of total income, who should all pay tax, Okay, who should all pay tax is something that is talked about in section 5, and section 6 will tell you residential status. Right, so in residential status we have two conditions. One is basic conditions, another is additional conditions. Under basic conditions, they'll say if a person is resident in India during a previous year for a period amounting in all to 182 days or 60 days in the previous year plus 365 days out of 4 previous preceding years, if he is able to satisfy any one condition, he will become a resident. Getting basic conditions, there are two conditions. One is either you be in India for a period of 182 days in the previous year, or if you are unable to do that, at least be in India for 60 days in the previous year. Before that, for 4 years you should be there in India for 365 days. If you are able to satisfy any one condition, you will become a resident. You will become a resident. But we should never be happy with finding out whether somebody is a resident and not a resident. We should also find out whether he is ordinarily resident or not ordinarily resident. To find out that, we have additional conditions. Again, there are two conditions. Out of 10 years, he should be resident in India for 2 years, or out of 7 years, he should be in India for 730 days. Then we can say he is a resident and ordinary resident. In put it simple terms, in a mathematical terms, if somebody wants to understand, there are 3 kinds of people: ROR, RNOR, NR. Right? When it comes to basic condition, he has to satisfy any one condition. There are 2 conditions, right? 182 days ka a condition, and the second one is second condition. This both put together is a single condition. Don't get confused here. So you have to satisfy either of the 2 conditions in order for you to be a resident and ordinary resident. On top of that, you have to satisfy additional conditions also. Additional conditions, both. He has to be resident for 370 days in 7 previous years. At the same time, he has to be resident 2 out of 10 years. So then we are saying him as a resident and ordinary resident. What this R and OR will do? He will also same thing. He will satisfy any one condition. Like out of these two conditions, he will satisfy any one condition. Coming to this additional condition, he will satisfy only one condition. Okay? Any one condition. Then we will call him as a resident but not ordinarily resident. Coming to non-resident, he will fail to satisfy both the basic conditions. Failed both. Now getting? So there are 3 people: resident and ordinary resident. Basic condition 1, additional 2. R and OR, basic condition 1, additional conditions only 1. Okay? NR, he will fail to satisfy both the basic conditions. And one point I didn't tell you, this second condition will not be applicable for few people. People who are going on a ship as a crew member, it will not be applicable. For the people who are going out of India on account of employment or any business, it will not be applicable to him. For anybody who is a resident of India, who is staying outside India but is just coming for a vacation in India, so for him also this condition will not be applicable. So there is a high possibility that you will find a question based upon this provision. Based upon this question. So this is what we have for residential status. And coming to scope of total income, this section is very important and we will solve some questions also. Section 5, scope of total income. For that you have to remember this format, you will get 6 to 8 marks on this. RNOR, ROR. Logic also I'll explain, but in examination you have to remember the format. So there are in India, outside India. Basic segregation is in India, outside India. If it is in India, as it accrued in India or deemed to be accrued in India, in both the situation, everybody should pay the tax. These three kind of people, right? Just now we were spending some time in understanding. All the three people will pay tax if it is accrued in India or deemed to be accrued in India. So you might ask question, what do you mean by this accrued in India, deemed to be accrued in India? For that there is a separate section. That section is section 9. Section 9 will tell what are all the incomes that are deemed to be accrued in India. See, if you are debating on this, definitely it is an issue. But income tax is like, don't come for a debate. We are deciding that it is deemed to be accrued in India. The moment I am saying that this is deemed to be accrued, so there should not be any discussion on whether this is accrued or not. I am saying it's deemed to be accrued. Okay. So like that, like on a forceful way, section 9 is telling you that these are all deemed to be accrued in India. The same way, received in India or deemed to be received in India. Again, you might ask a question, what do you mean by this deemed to be received? For that we have a separate section, section 7. Okay, those sections also we will deal now only. So deemed to be received or received, both the situation, everybody should pay tax in India. Okay, so I can say when somebody is using Indian resources, either accrual or receipt, you have to pay tax, irrespective of your residential status. Coming to outside India, if it is a business controlled from India, like there is a business in UK, I am controlling from India. So it's a business controlled from India. I am taking those decisions from India, right? So the first two people will pay and the third one will not pay. Coming to any other also, anything other than the above three, only the first one will pay and the second one and third one will not pay. Okay, so what you can understand from this chart, what we can understand is RNOR is paying tax on his whatever it is. Global income. So sorry for that. RNOR is paying tax on every income that is getting, either in India or outside India, is paying tax. Coming to this NR is paying tax only on the income which is either accrued or received in India, otherwise is not paying tax, right? So coming to ROR is paying tax on the income which is controlled from India. So this is a basic sections of section 5 and section 6. We will not be leaving here, we will be solving few questions. I'll take one question. So this is one of the questions I wanted to solve here. Compute the total income in the hands of an individual aged 45 years, being a resident and ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, and non-resident. So there are three kind of scenarios. So he's asking like if this happens to one party, you tell me what is the status. Okay. Further, the examination approach should be like this. We need to draw the ROR, RNOR, NR. And if a particular thing is given, you write the name of it completely. If it is taxable, you write the amount. If it is not taxable, you write nil. Okay, like that you have to solve for the all items, and whenever there is an exemption, you take out the exemption also. He's not simply asking it's taxable or not, he's asking his total income also, right? So you need to, like, if for an example, if he's saying that agricultural land is situated in India, we know that it is exempt, right? So you write it agricultural land situated in India, but don't write the amount, you write only nil. Within the bracket you can mention that since it is exempt, it's not coming, or since it's exempt under section 10(1), it is excluded. Okay, so that's the way it should be written. I'll be reading these things. Interest on UK development bonds, 50% received in India. In UK there is a bank and the bank is paying some interest. Is it accrued in India? No, it's not accrued in India. So the one for which this concept is not applicable, we need to take only 50%. What I mean by that is, as we discussed, or maybe in top also there is, right? Accrued or deemed to be accrued, everybody should pay. But is it accrued or deemed to be accrued in India? No. So this logic is failed for that particular point. Received or deemed to be received, is it received? Yes. Only 50% is received. So ROR will pay only 50%, NR will pay only 50%. But when it comes to R and OR, he will not pay for 50%, he will pay for 100%. I'll repeat this point. He will pay for 50%, he will pay for 50%, he will pay for 100%. Why? The reason is that the accrual concept has failed. Because of that, we went for the receipt concept. But for R and OR, irrespective of where it is accrued, he will pay the global income, like he will pay tax on his global income, right? So for him it is all 100%, and for other people, when it is not accrued in India, you have to go with the receipt rule. So in simple words, first you check the accrual concept. Like, is it accrued in India? If it is accrued in India, 100% for everybody. If it is not accrued in India, then you see the receipt concept. How much is received? If it is only 50% is received, only 50% is taxable in India for R, NOR and NR. For ROR, it is always 100%. Remember, for ROR, always write 100%. And one more thing, when this test is passed, like we are able to satisfy the first test, like it's accrued in India, then we need not see how much is received in India or how much is received outside India. That is not required. The moment it is accrued in India, let everybody pay tax. So coming to our discussion, ROR will pay 10,000, R and OR will pay only 50% because accrual concept has been failed for him. Receipt concept is only successful, and NR also will pay only 50%. I will not be solving all the questions. I will be solving only 4 or 5 interesting things, and the remaining is all the concept is same. Income from business in Chennai, 50% received in India. Income from business in Chennai. The business is situated in Chennai, which means it's India. The moment it is accrued in India, everybody should pay. So 20,000, 20,000, 20,000 for all the 3 people. We will not be looking at 50% is received in India. You cannot say only I'll take only 50% for R and OR. No. The moment it is accrued in India, you don't go for the receipt rule. First you check the accrual rule. Short-term capital gains on sale of a share of an Indian company. The moment it is an Indian company, everybody should pay. Dividend from British company received in London. Company is British company. There only we received. Who will pay? Is it a business control from India? No. So even the third condition also failed. Only the fourth condition is satisfied. I'll explain this for better understanding. In our table there were there were three. First one is accrual test. Is it accrued in India? No, that is failed. Is it received in India? No, that is failed. Okay. Dividend declared in London, it's not accrued in India. It's not accrued in India. Is it received in India? No, it's not received in India. Third one is it a business control from India? Are you controlling the business? No, we are not controlling. So then only the fourth condition is satisfied. What is that fourth condition? Any other. So any other, who will pay? Only the first one will pay. The remaining two will not pay. I'm just telling you how you can apply this format for any other question. We'll solve for one more thing. Income from house property in London deposited in bank at London brought to India. Okay. So in London there is a house property. Is it accrued in India? No. First condition is failed. Is it received in India? Somebody might say yes, but the answer is no. Reason: when the rent is received already in London, it's only subsequent transfer. Like if I'm going to a foreign country and there I'm earning some income, so then it says that I am receiving the income there only. If I'm subsequently transferring that amount to my parents in India, then you cannot say that my parents are receiving in India. No, I only received there, I'm just transferring it here. So, income from house property in London, is it accrued in India? No. Received in India? No. Is it controlled from India? Are you controlling the rent? No, it is generating there only. So, the third test also failed. Only the fourth test is passed. What is the fourth test? Test any other. So, only ROR will pay. Income from property situated in Pakistan received there. In Pakistan there is a property. Is it accrued in India? No. Is it received in India? Received there. So it's not received in India. Is it controlling from India? No. Only the fourth one is passed. Who will pay? ROR will pay. The remaining two will not pay. Okay. Agricultural income from land in Rajasthan. So Rajasthan, there is one land. It is accrued in India. Yes, it is accrued in India. Everybody should pay, but don't be in a rush. Agricultural income is exempt. So you just write dash dash dash. Dividend from Reliance Petroleum Limited, an Indian company. The moment it is an Indian company, it is accrued in India, everybody should pay. Okay, so like that you can solve the other things. We have more important things to solve anyway. Yeah, so where are we? We have done with short title, definitions, few definitions we covered, anyway few more to follow. Previous year, assessment year and their exceptions. Charge of income tax, what all heads will come. Scope of total income, I told ROR, RNOR and NR. Residential status, basic condition, additional conditions. Income deemed to be received in India. So this is again important. Deemed to be received in India is like we are not receiving income, but income tax is deeming that you are receiving it. Okay, so there are 4 points like that. Employer is contributing to the recognized provident fund of the employee in excess of 12% of salary. If I am receiving 10,000 salary, my employer should give only 12% as a recognized provident fund contribution. He should give only 1200. Out of love, he is giving 1300. So the extra 100, it's not coming into my pocket. It's only going to my fund. Whenever I retire, whenever something happens to me, that amount will be coming. So till the time I'm not paying tax, right? So what income tax is saying, employer, you're allowed to contribute only 12% in your employee's name. But if it happens to exceed 12%, that excess will be deemed as received in India. Then interest 9.5%. So these problems are important for your final assessment sums also. Interest, when it comes to interest, I will be contributing in recognized provident fund. My employer will also be contributing recognized provident fund. Both out of the two amounts, the fund will invest in some investments. They'll get some interest. That interest they will pass on to us. If it happens to exceed 9.5%, that excess will be treated as deemed to be received in India. Okay. And the third one, transfer from unrecognized provident fund to recognized provident fund. Okay, all these years I have been contributing in unrecognized provident fund, which is not recognized by the Income Tax Act. So then at the time of retirement or just before the retirement, what I'm smartly doing is I'm transferring from my unrecognized provident fund to recognized provident fund. So this is also as good as you're escaping tax. It's like if you're withdrawing from recognized provident fund, you will not be able to pay tax. You will not be required to pay tax, right? So is converting from unrecognized to recognized. So the amount which is converted is deemed to be received in India. Coming to the fourth one, pension scheme. Employers are allowed to take pension scheme for the employees, but that should be under the provisions like 80CCD. Like there are certain limitations. As per that amount only, or maximum that amount only, you have to contribute to your employee. But if you happen to exceed that amount, that will be treated as deemed to be received in India. Right, so what have we done so far? We have done with your income deemed to be received in India concept also, like the 4 points. And dividend income, this is again a bit important, I would say. So when company is declaring dividend, they will be paying tax under 115O at the rate of 15%. And they will be paying the surcharge as well as the education cess, but that is not the discussion here. When the company is declaring dividend, company is bearing the dividend distribution tax. When the company is already bearing the dividend distribution tax, it should be exempt for the shareholder. So 1034 is coming into picture and saying, yes, because the company has already taken the burden of tax, we don't have to pay. This used to be the provision long back, but there was some amendment. The amendment is like, up to 10 lakhs of dividend, it is exempt for you. Beyond 10 lakhs, if you happen to receive dividend beyond 10 lakhs, that will be taxable at 10%. So that is been said under section 115 BBDA. Okay, when a company is declaring, they have to pay tax. Shareholder, it is exempt. But now only up to 10 lakhs it is exempt. Beyond 10 lakhs, you have to pay tax. Okay, so that is BBDA, 115 BBDA. So this is coming to dividend, and we also have something called deemed dividend. Again, what is this? Just like deemed accrual, deemed received, it's a deemed dividend. So what this point is saying is, when a company is declaring dividend, they are taking the hit of this 15% plus the education cess and the surcharge and education cess, right? So in order to avoid the tax, what people used to do is, they will pass on the benefit to the shareholder, not by naming it as a dividend. They will put some other word. See, if I say it's a dividend, I have to pay this dividend distribution tax, right? So instead of calling it dividend, I'll call something else, but I'll pass on the same benefit that I would have otherwise passed. So there are sections like section 222A. This is stopping a company from distributing assets to the shareholder. What it used to happen is that the company will distribute assets to the shareholder, and when somebody asks that it's not a dividend, I'll not pay dividend distribution tax. Okay, so in order to prevent those people, 222A is coming to picture and saying that when the company is distributing assets to the shareholder, to the extent to which there is a accumulated profits in the company, that much will be treated as a deemed dividend, because that much you would have declared as a dividend. Okay, again you have 222B, 222C, 222D and 222E. All these are final concepts. This is instead of giving assets, here you will be giving debenture stock, something like that. This has 222C is company into liquidation. When the company goes into liquidation, when there is a huge profit in their reserves, instead of calling it as a dividend, they simply say that we are distributing the assets and we are liquidating the company. So there is a element of dividend in the assets also. And this is a capital reduction. Like your face value is 10 rupees, I am reducing it to 8 rupees. I am just giving back your own money, but still it's not your own money. It's just, see, if it is a capital reduction, you need to go to the court, you need to get the approval, you need to get the shareholders permission and everything. So simply you cannot on your own you can say that it's a capital reduction. Okay, coming to this 222E, it is a loans and advances. When the company is giving loans and advances to the shareholder, it's obvious that you're trying to escape the tax. Why? I'm not here to give you any dividend, right? I'm not here to give you any loan, right? Like if you have to take a loan, you go to bank. If I have excess money, I'll go to bank and invest. But why am I giving loan to or loans and advances to my shareholder? Yes, accounting was it's correct only, but if you say take the substance, I'm not charging any interest, or maybe I don't know when you will pay. I will simply write you are my loans and advances. Okay, so this is all what we have for dividends. Again, we'll go back to our discussion. Income deemed to accrue or arisen in India, like in the scope of total income I said, right, accrued or deemed to be accrued. So you need to understand what do you mean by this deemed to be accrued. Yeah, this is also a bit important and you can expect some questions here. The following income shall be deemed to accrue or arisen in India. All income accruing or arising whether directly or indirectly through or from any business connection in India. The moment there is any business connection in India, like a non-resident individual is doing something in India, and there is a business connection. If the department is successful in establishing that there is a business connection in India, it is deemed to be accrued in India. Don't come and debate. We are successful in establishing there is a business connection. So we need to understand what do you mean with this business connection. I'll take that also. But for time being, if the department is successful in establishing that there is a business connection in India, then it is deemed to be accrued in India. Through or from any property in India, like there is one property, just now we were in our example where I was saying land situated in India. So it's a property situated in India. So the moment it is situated in India, you will not see who is the owner, you will not see in which currency they are trading and who is receiving, where is receiving, that is all irrelevant. The moment it is situated in India, it is deemed to be accrued in India. You will not even see what else is, nothing else. Through or from any asset or source of income in India, like there is a building, there is a hotel, or there is some company, there is a source of income, right? Like the moment there is a source of income which is situated in India, it is deemed to be accrued in India. Through the transfer of a capital asset in India. So this is a case study related, like a Vodafone case study. Like there is a asset in India. The asset is held by an Indian company. The Indian company is held by a foreign company, like it's a subsidiary of a foreign company, and that foreign company has some shares in some other company. So there is a change in the ownership in outside India, but that is all relating to the assets situated in India. Like their share prices are going up and down, their valuation is going up and down just because of the property which is situated in India. So you can say, even though the transaction is taking place abroad, outside India, in foreign currency, agreement is also entered there only, none of the parties are relating to India, but still the value has been derived mainly from the asset located in India. So I can say this is a there is a business connection and it has to be taxed in India. It is deemed to be accrued in India. Okay, that is one point. And income which falls under the head salaries if it is earned for services rendered in India. I'll just take an example. There is a company in US, they have an employee from US citizen only. He's coming into India and he's providing services here. He's employed by a non-resident. He's receiving in foreign currency only, but the services have been rendered in India. The moment the services have been rendered in India, we can say there is a business connection or there is a accrual, like deemed accrual. The rest period or leave period which is preceded and succeeded by services rendered in India and forms part of the service contract of employment shall be regarded as an income earned in India. Like the one who is coming into India and is providing services. So we are saying this thing accrued in India, right? Not just the services that is rendering in India. If anything relating to that contract, if he is getting any leave salary or leave benefit preceding or succeeding, before coming into India or after leaving India, if he is enjoying any leave kind of thing, and if you are able to say that that is also because he is providing services in India, we can say even those amounts also deemed to be accrued in India. Take an example, from Jan, he will be coming into India and working in one of the companies. So what the company is saying, anyway you are going there in Jan, right? So for 1 month in December, you go and do holiday in some other country. But that is as a condition that you will provide services in India from Jan, right? So whatever he is receiving as a benefit, as a part of the services which are going to be provided in India, we can say even that is also accrued in India. He might be going to some other country, some France or some other country, but still that benefit is getting because he is providing services in India in 1 or 2 months, then we can say that is also deemed to be accrued in India. Income chargeable under the head salaries payable by government to a citizen of India for services rendered outside India. So this is like Indian government is hiring one IAS or IPS or some government official, and what he's doing is going abroad, is going to some other country, and there is providing some services. So you cannot say that is a non-resident, is providing services outside India, is receiving amount in US dollars. No. He is working for India. And he's been employed by Indian government. The moment the Indian government is coming into the picture, right? So we can say that his salary is accrued in India. Dividend of an Indian company outside India, even the Indian company which is declaring dividend outside India, we can say that is accrued in India. And income by way of interest, royalty and fees for technical services, this is something I'll explain separately. Interest, royalty, fees for technical services. So what is this is, I am taking a loan from US to start up a business in India. So when I am taking a loan from US, the person will be expecting some interest, right? So should that person be held liable to pay tax in India is the question. Or I am paying royalty for using one product license of a person. He is a non-resident. So should he be should he be made liable to pay tax in India? This is the question. So in order to say who should pay tax or on which amount he should pay tax, we need to understand who are the payer, who is making that payment to that non-resident. We are taking loan, or we are taking some royalty related like intellectual property, or we are taking any professional services. All depends upon who is paying that, who is making that payment. If the payment is made by government, it's always taxable. You forget about everything. The moment the government of India is making these payments to a non-resident, it's always taxable. But if the payer is a resident, just like us, it is also taxable or always taxable, except for the purpose of business which are going to happen in India, which is going to be situated in India, meaning outside India. Yeah, I'm sorry. Meaning I'm taking a loan for a business, and the business is to be situated in India, so it is taxable. It's always taxable. But if I'm taking a loan from a non-resident, and I'm investing the money or using the funds for the business which is going to be situated outside India, like UK, I want to start a business, I'm taking a loan from US. So will this person who is lending the money be liable to be taxed? No. Reason, the business which I'm going to start is situated outside India, except when it is situated outside India. Coming to non-resident, it is not taxable. Why not taxable? Understand, a UK person is taking a loan from US person. He is not even coming to India. Why should he pay the tax? Both are non-residents only. It's always not taxable. Except, but if he is using that money to be invested in India, like situated in India, it is taxable. You're getting these major differences. If the government of India is making the payment, always taxable. If a resident is making the payment, always taxable, except for the business which is to be situated outside India. If a non-resident is making the payment, always not taxable, except if it is for the purpose of a business which is going to be happening in India. Okay, so this is our section 9. And as I just told you that if the department is successful in establishing that there is a business connection, it is always taxable in India. But we need to understand that not everything is a business connection. There are certain conditions. I'll explain here. Whatever I have underlined, this is like more important. You need to produce these words in the examination. We cannot write like in how I'm telling you in a layman language. Purchase of goods in India for the purpose of export. Okay, there is a non-resident person. He's just purchasing an item and he wants to export it to his own country. Then where is the business connection? What business is he doing? is just purchasing an item and exporting it. Okay, so there is no business connection. Running of a news agency of publishing newspaper, magazines or journals. There is an international news channel or news magazine or news agency. What they are doing is they are coming into India. They are looking at the situation in India, like maybe relating to COVID. They want to see what is the impact of COVID in India. They are taking some interviews. They are taking some views. That information and that views and news, they are just exporting to their own headquarters, their own country. They are not using this information for a commercial purpose in India. So you can say there is no business connection. Understand, the BBC is coming into India, taking the news and views, and they are going. So there is no business connection. You cannot ask them to pay tax of their global income. But if they are using this news and views in India for any other commercial purpose, then there is a business connection. They have to pay tax on that income. And confined to shooting of any cinematographic film in India, like we often see that some Hollywood movies are made on Indian themes, right? So we all think that, okay, should they be paying tax of their film in India? The answer is that first you have to establish that there is a business connection. In order to establish that there is a business connection, you have to see something like this. If that cinematographic film and everything is produced by an individual, he has to be the citizen of India. If the movie has been produced by an individual, like a person, he has to be a citizen of India. If it is a firm, at least one of the partners needs to be resident of India or citizen of India. Getting? If one of the partners at least should be a resident of India or citizen of India, or if it is a company, at least one of the shareholders must be a resident of India or citizen of India. You're getting? But the provision has been given in a reverse way. What do you mean by that reverse way? The individual is not a citizen of India, or none of the partners in the firm is a resident of India or citizen of India. None of the shareholders of the company are resident of India or citizen of India. Then we can say that there is no business connection. In simple words, if you want to prove that there is a business connection, individual, he has to be a citizen of India, or if it is a firm, at least one of the partners has to be a resident of India or citizen of India, right? And one more discussion, this explanation 2 is also kind of important, and this is a case study question I have seen in some books, so I want you to pay attention here. I am an individual, non-resident company, they are appointing me, and what they are saying is, Sampath, you conclude the contract, you decide the contract price, you finish up the contract, you not like performing the activities, just like contract you complete, like non-resident, there is one company who are providing certain services, or they are supplying some goods. Okay, they cannot come here. They don't have an office here. Only through phone or through website, they are contacting me, Sampath, and they are saying that, Sampath, there are certain clients. You go there, you meet them. They have some requirements. You just talk to them. You conclude the contract. You finalize the contract. So if they are giving me an authority to conclude the contract, which is habitually I am doing it, then I can say there is a business connection. You're getting? Habitually I am doing, what am I doing? I am concluding the contracts. Then I can say there is a business connection. In another situation, what they say is, Sampath, you don't conclude the contract, I will do it myself, I'll do it through website, but you maintain a godown, you maintain the stock, you maintain the merchandise, from there you supply the goods to those buyers, whoever asks for. So I'm also almost like maintaining the stock. What do you mean by that? Like there is a business connection. And the third situation, I will not conclude the contract, I will not maintain the stock, but at least I'll go to the clients to market, to get the orders. So if I'm getting the orders on a continuous and habitually, then there is a business connection. And again, there is one exception. What is this exception? If I am doing all this as a part of my overall business, then there is no business connection. Example, I am here starting a business just to conclude the contract. Some people find it difficult to conclude the contract, so I want to explore that area. So I started a business saying that whoever wants to tie up or whoever wants to conclude the contract or to get into the terms and all, I will be here to conclude the contracts. I will take it on a commission basis. This is my business. So now the non-resident is appointing me and saying that, Sampath, you also conclude this one contract. So I'm doing that one contract is a part of my overall in the course of my business. So then I cannot say that there is a business connection. But if I'm doing independently for him on an habitual basis, then there is a business connection. Okay, so there are certain ICA illustrations. I'll be reading and solving it, and I request you to open your questions also in your book also. Mr. Anand is an Indian citizen and member of the crew member of a Singapore-bound shipped Indian ship engaged in carrying of passengers in international traffic departing from Chennai port on 6th June 2019. From the following details of the previous year 1920, determine the residential status of Mr. Anand for assessment year 2021. Assuming that his stay in India in the last 4 previous years is 400 days and last 7 years previous years is 750 days. So I'm expecting that this kind of a question will come in the examination for your residential status. The point here to be noted is that when he's getting onto the ship, should you be considering the date of getting on is also in India or outside India? So CBDT came into the picture and they gave a clarification saying that date entered into the continuous discharge certificate in respect of joining the ship 6th June. So when, if I am a crew member, I am going on to a ship, my joining date is 6th June. So the 6th June will also be considered as not forming part of India, which means that on 6th June I am not in India. Only till 5th June I am in India. So that's how you should understand. And here, discharge certificate in respect of signing off the ship. So when the ship is returning back and coming to India, the dates entered 9th December. So the 9th December also it means that I am outside India. So the date of joining, the date of relieving, both are considered to be days of residing outside India. So coming to the solving the problem, overall there are 366 days. I am following the institute methodology. Overall 360 days because this is a leap year, and we need to eliminate the number of days is away from India. What you can do otherwise, 1st April say 5th June tak you calculate once, and then 10th December say 31st March you calculate one, you combine. That is one procedure. Another procedure is total number of days in a year deducted by the number of days for which he was away from India. So how many days he was away from India? 6th June, like there are 30 days in India, 30 days in June. He got into ship on 6th, which means that till 5th he was in India. So I'll deduct 5. So which means that 25 days in June he was away from India. July 31, August 31, September, October, November, December, don't make this mistake. December also 9 days, 180 days. 187 days. So 187 days is away from India. So 366 minus 187 will give 179 days, which means that for that relevant previous year he is in India for only 179 days. But is that our answer? No, that is not our answer. The answer is that as per our basic conditions, he should be in India for 182 days, or he should be in India for 60 plus 365 out of 4. Okay, but don't make this mistake which I am making. The second condition will not be applicable to a crew member of a ship. So we will not check this condition, we will only check the first condition. The first condition is that he has to be in India for 182 days. Here he is in India only for 172 days, which means he is failed to fulfill the basic condition, hence he will become a non-resident. That's how you need to write in your examination. And this cricketer, this logic I'll explain fast. Bradley is an Indian. Bradley, an Australian cricketer player, visits India for 100 days in every financial year. This has been his practice for the last 10 years. So he's coming into India for every year 100 days. What is our condition? He has to be in India for 182 days. Is he in India for 182 days in the last year? No, this condition is failed. Again, but he has second option. He has to be in India for at least 60 days. Is he in India for 60 days? Yes, he was in India because 100 days was there, right? So he fulfilled the first condition. Second condition is that out of the 4 years preceding the previous year, he has to be in India for 365 days. How many days he was there? He was there for 400 days. 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100. So he fulfilled the second condition also. So when he fulfilled the second condition, he will become the resident. We will not stop there. We will go further. What we do is, is he resident in India for last 2 years out of 10 years? and we also see whether he is in India for 7 out of 30 days. If both are failed, it will become, if one is what is the question? I'll write here. 2 out of 10 years he should be resident. 730 days out of 7 years he should be resident. Okay. So because he is staying in India for 100 days every year, he is fulfilling this condition, but he is not resident in India for 2 out of 10 years. Okay. So because of that, because he fulfill only one condition, we will say he is a resident but not ordinarily resident. If he had fulfilled both the condition, he would have become resident and ordinarily resident. So these are few illustrations, and coming to our main point. These are few questions. Yeah, so coming to the residential status, if the individual, as I said, we have to see that 616 basic condition and additional conditions. If it is a HUF, we'll see whether the affairs are only controlled outside India. If the affairs of the business are controlled only outside India, it will become a non-resident. At least some part of the affairs are controlled from India, 100% or some parts, we can say it's a resident. The moment it is a resident, again we need to say whether this is a resident and ordinary resident or resident but not ordinary resident, like this. For HUF, first you check whether he is a resident or non-resident. How do you check? If 100% of the affairs are controlled outside India, you will become non-resident, or anything is controlled from India, you will become resident. You don't stop there. Again you see the Karta. If he is, you see his residential status. If he is fulfilling those additional conditions, both conditions you will say ROR, otherwise RN OR. Okay. Coming to firm and AOP, the same logic. Affairs are controlled 100% outside India, it will become non-resident. At least if a few affairs are controlled from India, you will say it's a resident. There is no question of ROR or RNOR for firms. And company, if it is an Indian company or Indian established company, either in the old act or new act 2013 or 1956, it's an Indian company, or the place of effective management is in India. That is a final level topic. If the place of effective management is in India, we can say it's a resident company. So these are done. Connections also done. Yeah. So what is left over is for the current session. Slab rates is something that we missed out. When you come to slab rates, always remember this section 231 persons. You need to find out the slab rates for all the persons. Otherwise, you will be missing out few things. Individual, HUF, AOP, BOI, AJP. For all these, basic exemption limit is 2.5 lakh. For here it is nil. 2.5 lakh to 5 lakh, it is 5%. 5 lakh to 10 lakh, it is 20%. 20 lakhs and above, it is 30%. Okay, but if the person happens to be of the age of 60 years or more up to 80 years, we will say it is up to 3 lakhs is a basic exemption limit, and if it happens that his age is more than 80 years, we say it is 5 lakhs and the remaining else is same. But remember one point, there is a bit question. This is applicable only for a resident individual. If somebody is coming outside India, non-resident, you don't take this higher basic exemption limits, even if the age is more than 60 years. Okay, so what we found out? We found out for individual, HUF, AOP, BOI and AJP, but we are not found out for firm. When I say firm, LLP always included, and local authority. For them, the tax rate is 30% flat. And coming to cooperative society, again we have a different rates for cooperative societies. Cooperative societies up to 10,000, 10%, 10,000 to 20,000, 20%, 20,000 and above 30%. Don't make the silly mistake. If income is falling under the third bracket, you only multiply by 30%. That's not the right way. The right way is up to 10,000, 10%. So 1,000 will pay. Up to 10,000 to 20,000, 2,000. So you'll pay 2,000 here. It's not just 2,000, 1,000 of the previous slab plus 2,000 of the current slab. If his income is falling under this, you will pay 1,000 of the first slab plus 2,000 of the second slab plus whatever the amount is coming for the third slab. The same logic holds good here also. If somebody's income is 10 lakh 1 rupee, don't say that the excess of 10 lakhs is only 1 rupee, so I'll deduct 1 rupee multiplied by 30%, 30 paisa I'll pay. No, it is between this nil, between this 5% 12,500, between this 20% 1 lakh, and between this whatever it comes that will be taken. Okay, so what we have found out, we found out for individuals and all those people, firms, LLPs, cooperative societies, and we have to find out for company as well. Coming to company, we have domestic companies, we have foreign companies. When it comes to domestic company, you check two aspects. If the previous year is between 17 and 18, like the financial year, if his turnover or gross receipts is not more than 400 crores, the rate of tax is only 25%. For others, it is only 30%. Getting? Remember this year. During this period, if the turnover is less than 400 crores, it is only 25%. Coming to foreign companies, it is 40%. Okay, so this is the slab rates for different individuals. Again, we'll do the same thing for search. Surcharges. Okay, again when you go for surcharge also, always remember the section of 231 person. For everybody you need to understand. For individual, HUF, AOP, BOI, artificial judicial person, the slab rates are something like this. Up to 50 lakhs nil, 50 lakhs to 1 crore, 1 crore to 2 crores, 2 crores to 5 crores, 5 crores and above. If it is 150 lakhs to 10 crores, 1 crore, 10%, 1 crores to 2 crores, 15%, 2 crores to 5 crores, 25%, 5 crores and above, 37%. Okay, so this is a slab rate here, and there is an amendment. The amendment is, if the income includes any income under section 111A and 112A, like securities which are listed in a recognized stock exchange or units in a equity oriented funds. So if your income includes any of this income, the maximum rate should not go beyond 15%. What do you mean by that? If I am falling under this bracket, I have 3 crore of total income, of which 2.5 crores is normal and 0.5 crores is this 111A and 112A. 112A is for long term and 111A is for short term, these specified securities. So for this I'll pay surcharge of only 15%. For the remaining I'll pay 25%. Understanding? Out of your total income, if any income of this 111A and 112A is included, to that extent you pay only 15%, remaining as per the slab rates. Otherwise of saying is, for these three segments people, there won't be applicability of this provision. Obviously, right? Otherwise also I will be paying 15% surcharge. Now also I will be paying 15% surcharge. There is no impact of that amendment. The amendment is as impact only on these two people who are paying surcharge more than 15%. Okay, so that is for the individuals and all. Coming to firms, LLPs, local authority or cooperative society, below 1 crore, more than 1 crore. Here it is nil. Up to 1 crore you will not pay. 1 crore, more than 1 crore you will pay 12%. Right? Coming to companies, these are all memory related things. There is no much logic in it. You have to remember, otherwise you will end up losing marks. Company में again will bifurcate between domestic company and foreign company. For domestic company, 3 segregations: below 1 crore, 1 crore to 10 crores, 10 crores and above, or more than 10 crores. Okay, the same thing here as well. Below 1 crore you will not pay anything. Here you will pay 7%, here 12%, here you will pay nil. Again below 1 crore, 1 crore to 10 crores you will pay 2%, here you will pay 5%. Yeah, 2%, 5%, 7%, 12%. So this is more important examination point of view. You just remember there could be one bit question, you will get 1 mark. Okay, so this is for your slab rates. I'll see if anything is still pending from today's discussion point of view. Yeah, this agricultural definition I told, right? So the agricultural definition is like if you are staying in municipality or cantonment area, if the population is up to 10,000, that is your specified area. In your municipality or cantonment, population is up to 10,000. Within the purview of the municipality and cantonment, whatever you call, that is your like if the land is situated in that area, you can say that is a specified area. But if the population is between 10,000 to 1 lakh, like the population is more than 10,000 up to 1 lakh, you go and see 2 kilometers radius. Viewed aerially. So from these boundaries, you go and see this 2 kilometers radius wala, and if your land happens to be situated here, that is also specified. So the area to which you are going all depends upon the population of the cantonment and the municipality. Obviously, when there is more population, there will be more outskirts and more development, right? So there is no necessity to say that it's an agricultural land. And the population is 1 lakh to 10 lakh, it is 6 kilometers like this. And the population is between 10 lakhs and more than 10 lakhs, it is 8 kilometers. From examination point of view, I can say you remember this 8 kilometers concept, everything will be okay. Block of assets we have done, capital assets we will do when we do this capital gain chapter. And the charitable purpose is not required. This is I explained so much. Relative, like your brother, sister, spouse, and a linear assistant and descendant. Short-term capital asset, this I'll take separately. Yeah, listen, when you are calculating the period of holding, this is important for capital gain chapter. There are few items which will come for 12 months, 24 months and 36 months. What all will come? All listed securities, units of equity oriented fund or unit trust of India, zero coupon bonds, right? So if you are holding it for 12 months, you are saying it's a short term, otherwise it's a long term. Again, the concept of 15% or 10% will come, that I'll explain. For time being, If it is a listed security in a recognized stock exchange, you are saying it is a 12 months. But what happens if it is unlisted? This is unlisted share. Observe the point here. It's a listed security, but it's unlisted share. Is not using the word security, it's only share. If it is an unlisted share, 12 months is a period. If it is unlisted security other than share, there are so many things which trade in the stock market, right? If it is happens to be other than share, it is 36 months is a period to say whether that is a short term or long term. Otherwise, it is 24 months. I'll repeat, this is important, this is a confusing area. For anything which is listed, you take only 12 months. If it is unlisted share, 24 months. Unlisted security other than share, 36 months. Units of equity oriented fund, 12 months. Units of debt oriented fund, 36 months. Units of equity oriented fund, 12 months. Equity of debt oriented fund, which means that I am investing in a mutual fund, and the mutual fund in turn investing in mostly in equity, like 65% of their total amount is they are investing in equity, which is almost like an equity only, right? So I'm treating it as if it is an equity, okay? But if it is a debt, again it's going to 36 months. Remember, equity oriented fund 12 months, debt oriented fund 36 months. Anything land and building, 24 months. It used to be 36 months, but they got it down to 24 months. Okay, any other asset, again 36 months, like business trust, units, REITs, InvITs, any other capital asset. Okay, so this is how you can find out the period of holding also. Anything left over, this is done. Transfer will come back. Previous year we are done. Rates done. Special rates, this point is important. We get the rates not just from the Income Tax Act or the Income Tax Act 1961, we also get the rates from the every Finance Act. The income tax is once made in 1961, Finance Act is done every year, right? So few rates we get it from Income Tax Act, few rates we get it from the Annual Finance Act, first schedule. Okay, so whatever the rates that we get it from our Income Tax Act, they are like special rates, like they are standard rates which they have given here. Again, I will explain separately. Yeah, so this will help you. If it is a security which is listed in a recognized stock exchange, if it is a unit of equity oriented fund or UTI, up to 1 lakh long term capital gain is exempt. I'll repeat. If it is a security listed in a recognized stock exchange where STT has been paid both at the time of purchase and at the time of sale, if it is a unit like these units, you need to pay STT only at the time of transfer. If the STT criteria is done and if the amount is up to 1 lakh exempt, beyond 1 lakh we pay tax at 10%. Okay, same thing. If it is a short term, same securities and same units, if it is a short term, we will pay tax, like I'm not writing here, just to save some time, we will be taxing at 15%. That's why people say, right? People say, right, like you don't sell it very quickly. You hold it for some more time. Okay, so because like if you are selling it in a long term, government is also giving you some benefit of lower taxes, 10% only. If it is a short term, 15%. That's how you need to remember. Short term, more tax. Long term, less tax. Okay, it used to be exempt altogether, but now only up to 1 lakh it is exempt. Beyond 1 lakh it is taxable at 10%. So coming to other than these specified things, whatever I said, you will be paying tax at 20%. In long term, there are so many items, right? Like in capital gain chapter, there are so many things will come. Everything you first check these criteria. If it is not matching here, if it is a long term, you take it into 20% unless otherwise specifically said so. Okay, or if it is a short term, you take with the slab rates. Okay, so this is how you will find out the tax rates, special tax rates. Again, we have section 115 BB, like winning from lotteries, crossword puzzles, race horses, card games and games of any other sort, gambling or betting of any other nature, 30% without any basic exemption limit, without giving any benefit, because you have enough money, because you have more money, I'm asking you not to go and you're going, so 30% flat rate is they have to pay. And coming to this 115 BBDA, I said it in the beginning of the session itself, and the company is declaring dividend, it used to be exempt for the shareholder, but now up to 10 lakh it is exempt, beyond that it's taxable at 10%. BBE is something like people are caught up doing some wrong things, like I'm depositing in a hundi, I'm withdrawing from a hundi, or I have a cash credit, I have an investment, I don't know where is the source, I have an investment but I'm not showing in my books of accounts. If I'm doing all these things and people come to me and asking me to pay tax, like rights or seeds or such, I have to pay taxes flat at 60%. It used to be 30%, now it is 60%. Okay. And surcharge though I have explained. Coming to rebate up to 5 lakhs for resident individuals, 12,500 is available. Like up to 5 lakhs, if your total income is up to 5 lakhs, you need to you can claim the rebate of 12,500. This is done. And marginal relief is something that I will explain with an example. To whom this relief is given, for whom the total income has exceeded marginally by the basic exemption limit. I'm not understanding like that. There is an individual who has total income of 51 lakh. This is again the institute question, so I'm not manufacturing any question here. How do I pay the tax? Step number 1, tax liability. Okay, so tax liability I will calculate directly. What will be my tax liabilities? 2.5 to 5 lakh I'll pay 12,500, 5 lakh to 10 lakhs I'll pay 1 lakh, and 5 lakhs and above, sorry 10 lakhs and above, how much I'll pay? 51 lakhs minus 10 lakhs into 30%, 12 lakh 30,000 I'll pay. Total it will become 1 lakh plus 12,500. So 13 lakh 42,500 is my tax liabilities without giving this marginal relief. But what this person says is, just because now we will add surcharge also. What will be the surcharge? What will be the surcharge? Surcharge, because he is an individual, because his income has exceeded, total income has exceeded more than 50 lakhs, we will ask him to pay 10%. So he will paying 1,34,250. So total liability will be 14,76,750. Okay. So what my concern is that, because my income has exceeded just 1 lakh, 50 lakh se 1 lakh jada, 1 lakh it has exceeded, but I end up paying 1,34,250. So it's unfair for me. So for those people, they are giving the relaxation. Don't go with the steps. Step number 1, step number 2. Understand the logic. I am doing normally. Now I am coming to know that I am paying surcharge of 1,34,250 just because my income has exceeded 1 lakh. I'm receiving 100 rupees as an income. I'm paying 150 rupees as a tax. What is the logic? It's better that I would have not earned the income only, right? So then the income tax is coming and saying, no, you are saying just because of that 1 lakh you are paying more surcharge, right? You calculate one more time. You tell me what is your total income without taking the effect of this surcharge, or without taking the effect of this 1 lakh rupees. So tax liability up to 50 lakhs. If my tax liability is up to 50 lakhs, what all I will pay? 12,500 up to 5 lakh, and up to 10 lakh 1 lakh, and up to 50 lakhs bole to 40 lakhs multiplied by 30,000, 12 lakhs. So 12 lakhs, 13 lakhs, 13 lakhs, 13 lakh 12,500. So there is no surcharge because my income has not exceeded 50 lakhs. Just an hypothetical. This step is just an hypothetical. So what my concern is, with 1 lakh of extra income, I was paying tax of 14,76,000. Without the effect of that 1 lakh extra income, I was paying only 13,12,500. So difference is 14,76,750. So I'm crying here. I'm crying saying that I'm paying 1,64,250 extra. But income tax is not agreeing to that. They are saying this is extra or excess of 1/2. Okay. In step number 4, they say how much has it exceeded from your excess of income. Your excess of income was only 1 lakh. You are paying 1,64,250, right? That excess of 1 lakh you don't pay. In simple terms, I am receiving an income of 100. I am paying surcharge of 120. So I am crying here. I am receiving 100. I am paying 120. What is this logic? Then the income tax is saying you are receiving extra 100, right? That 20 you are extra paying. The 20 I am wiping it off. Don't pay that extra 20, but at least the 100 so you pay it. You are earning this 100, you pay me this 100. Something like this. So 1,64,250 is the difference between these two minus because of that 1 lakh extra income. So 64,250 will be your relief. So simply tell me how much tax I should pay. You should pay tax on your original step number 1 without any relief minus relief. What was the relief? The 64,250 was a relief, and originally you had to pay 14,76,750. 14,76,750. The remaining amount you pay it now. Understand? Don't go with the formula. You go with the logic. Difference between hypothetical 50 lakhs and original 51 lakh. That extra is over and above that 1 lakh is your relief. Remaining you pay it as a tax. So that's what we have for the session number 1. If you like, please share it with your friends. Ask them to subscribe and encourage me so that I'll be coming up with the more videos of this kind. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.